Everything you know about the Old West is a lie, and Hollywood is to blame. Cowboys did not die in duels, they died trembling, addicted to morphine. All of Deadwood was illegal, and the most famous shootout happened in an alley the size of a bathroom. These 25 facts were buried in military archives for a reason. Stay until the end. The last one changes everything. Fact 1. The morphine epidemic was the real drug crisis of the Old West. Everyone remembers the duels at sunset, but no one talks about what came afterward. When the Civil War ended in 1865, thousands of soldiers returned home with an invisible problem: morphine addiction. On the battlefield, it was the only medicine that could ease the pain of an amputated arm or a bullet lodged in the body. The doctor gave the soldier a dose and sent him back into battle. By the time the war ended, his body was already craving more, and it was easy to get. Any small-town pharmacy sold morphine and laudanum over the counter without a prescription for a toothache or insomnia. They called it the soldier's disease. On the frontier, more men were hooked on that bottle than there were drunks in the saloon. Many cowboys did not go down in a shootout. They died trembling, unable to put down the bottle. And strangely enough, Hollywood never wanted to tell this part of the story. Fact 2. The OK Corral shootout took place in a space as narrow as a hallway. You've probably seen this shootout in movies about 50 times. Both sides face each other on a wide, dusty street. The wind kicks up the dirt, and everyone draws at the same time. But that's not exactly how it happened. The most famous showdown in the West took place in a cramped lot next to a stable in Tombstone, Arizona. The men were so close to one another that they could have touched their opponents just by reaching out an arm. On one side were the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday. On the other were the Clantons and the McClorys. Altogether, 9 armed men were packed into a space the size of a bathroom. When the first shot rang out, gunpowder smoke filled the area so quickly that almost no one could clearly see who was shooting. About 30 seconds later, it was over. 3 men lay dead on the ground. And the strangest part is that the lot is still there today, and visitors are shocked when they see it. It looks nothing like what Hollywood put on the screen. Fact 3. The Plains Indians went 10,000 years without horses. When you picture a native warrior, you probably think of a man riding a horse across the prairie with a bow in his hand. But for almost all of history, that scene did not exist. Horses actually originated in the Americas, but they disappeared from the continent about 10,000 years ago during the same extinction that wiped out the mammoths. For thousands of years, no people on the continent ever saw one. The Spanish brought the animal back in the 16th century. And what spread horses across the plains was a revolt. In 1680, the Pueblo Indians in New Mexico drove out the colonists and released their herds. From then on, the animals passed from tribe to tribe. The most impressive part is how quickly it happened. In less than 30 years, people who had never ridden anything became some of the greatest horsemen the world had ever seen. That entire warrior culture shown so often in movies was built in little more than a single generation. Fact 4. All of Deadwood was illegal. Every law, every arrest, every sentence. Gold was discovered in the Black Hills, in what is now South Dakota. The problem was that the land did not belong to the United States. It belonged to the Sioux Nation, guaranteed in writing by the Treaty of Fort Laramie, signed in 1868. Washington knew, the Army knew, and they did not lift a finger to stop the prospectors. Before long, thousands invaded the valley and built Deadwood from scratch. The town grew in a complete legal vacuum. No recognized territory, no federal court, not a single official law. It operated that way for nearly 2 years. Think about what that means. Every murder conviction, worthless. Every land deed, worthless. Every contract signed across a counter, nothing but a piece of paper with no legal value. It was there, in that legal limbo, that Wild Bill Hickok was shot in the back on August 2nd, 1876. The shooter, Jack McCall, was acquitted by a miners' court, but that court had no legal authority at all. Months later, McCall was arrested again, tried by a real court, and hanged. Fact 5. Tombstone didn't die from bullets. It died from water. Everyone remembers Tombstone because of the Earp shootout, but what killed the town was not a gun. It was water. The town was built on silver. Beneath the Arizona desert was a fortune, and men kept digging deeper and deeper to reach it. Then came the problem no one had seen coming. The deeper they dug, the closer they got to the underground water table. In 1886, the mines flooded. The pumps that removed the water caught fire and stopped working. No pumps, no mines, no mines, no money. The town's leaders raised more than $600,000 at the time, about $18 million today, to buy new pumps and drain the tunnels. It did not work. The water won. In less than a year and a half, 3 out of every 4 residents packed their bags and left. The town, made famous by the Earp brothers, did not fall because of outlaws or politics. It fell because the water rose, and no one could hold it back. Fact 6. The Daltons robbed their own hometown. October 5, 1892. Coffeyville, Kansas. The Dalton brothers ride into town with an ambitious plan: rob 2 banks at the same time. There was just one problem. It was the town where they had grown up. People there knew every one of their faces from church, school, and the streets. The Daltons thought they could slip by unnoticed in disguise. They could not. One resident took one look and recognized them. Word spread from person to person before the gang even drew their guns. While the outlaws held up the tellers, the men in town ran to the hardware store, grabbed rifles, and took up positions in the street. When the Daltons came out with the money, they walked into an ambush. The shootout lasted about 4 minutes. By the end, 4 outlaws lay dead on the ground. 4 townspeople were also killed defending their own town. It was one of the bloodiest robberies in the Old West, and it failed for one simple reason. They tried to rob people who knew them by name. Fact 7. The real obsession of the Old West was baseball, not shootouts. Forget the duel on the main street. If you landed in a western town on a Sunday afternoon, you would find the men doing something else: playing baseball. That's right. By the 1880s, almost every cattle town had its own team. Cowboys picked up a bat during breaks between cattle drives. Mining companies sponsored their teams and organized leagues to compete against each other. The team from Dodge City, Kansas, even had real uniforms. And they say Wyatt Earp himself, the most famous gunslinger in the area, took the field to play. In Colorado mining towns, games packed the stands with thousands of cheering people. It was the frontier's biggest form of entertainment, but Hollywood never told that part of the story. The movies preferred to sell shootouts, blood, and dust. Real life, in the end, revolved much more around good old baseball. Fact 8. The U.S. Army deliberately ordered the extermination of the bison. Around 1800, tens of millions of bison covered the Great Plains. The herds were so large that a train could sit still for hours waiting for the animals to cross the tracks. Now get this. In 1889, a survey found only 325 bison alive in the entire country. And the hardest part is that it was not an accident. It was a plan. General Philip Sheridan put it in writing in an official document that wiping out the bison was the most effective weapon against the Plains Indians. The logic was cold. Without bison, there was no food, clothing, or shelter. Without those things, there could be no resistance. And the Army did not just let it happen. It helped. It provided ammunition, transportation, and protection to the hunters. Each professional hunter killed hundreds of animals a day just for their hides, leaving the meat to rot in the field. In just a few years, an animal that once numbered in the millions nearly vanished from the face of the earth. It was not hunting, it was an order. Fact 9. Dodge City had fewer homicides than a major city today. Everyone grew up thinking the Old West was a slaughterhouse, a body dropping on every corner. But the records tell a different story. Dodge City, Kansas, considered one of the most violent towns on the frontier, averaged 1 or 2 murders a year at its peak. Tombstone, the Earp town, was about the same. An entire year, 2 or 3 people dead. Compare that with any major American city today, which records that number in a single week. Historian Robert Dykstra did the hard work. He tracked down every documented death in the 5 largest cattle towns in the West. Then he added them all up. The number was so low that many people refused to believe it. Shootouts on the main street with dozens of people killed practically never happened. They were rare. The truth is that Hollywood took that small amount of violence and multiplied it by 100 to fill the screen. The Old West was much more peaceful than the movies claimed it was. Fact 10. No one knows what the 5th card in the dead man's hand was. August 2nd, 1876. Deadwood. Wild Bill Hickok is sitting at a poker table in a saloon. He had a habit. He always sat with his back against the wall, keeping an eye on the door. That day, the only open seat forced him to sit with his back to the entrance. It was the end of him. A man named Jack McCall came up behind him, pressed a revolver against the back of Hickok's head, and pulled the trigger. Bill dropped dead with the cards still in his hand. He was holding 2 aces and 2 eights, all black. It became known as the dead man's hand. That part is in the records. But here is what almost no one tells you. The 5th card was lost. Not a single witness wrote down what it was. Worse, the name Dead Man's Hand was not invented until 1926, 50 years later, by a writer. In other words, every movie and every poker table that shows that 5th card is just guessing. To this day, no one knows how to complete the most famous hand in the history of the game. Fact 11. The Old West dentist's anesthetic got patients addicted. Imagine sitting in a dentist's chair sometime in the 1880s and walking out addicted. That is exactly what happened to many people on the frontier. Back then, having a tooth pulled was torture. There was no good anesthesia. Then, in 1860, a German chemist named Albert Niemann isolated a powerful substance from the leaves of a South American plant. The effect was impressive. Rub it on the gums, and the area went numb right away. It was the first local anesthetic that actually worked. Traveling dentists in the West adopted it immediately. By 1885, applying that solution inside a patient's mouth before pulling a tooth was routine. The problem came later. That substance caused strong physical dependence. Many people walked into the dentist's office with a toothache and walked out hooked on a new addiction without even knowing what they had been given. The torment did not end in the chair. It was just beginning in a different way. Fact 12. What killed most cowboys wasn't bullets. It was lightning. You probably think cowboys died in shootouts or were trampled by cattle. Wrong. The deadliest killer on the prairie came from the sky. Picture the scene. Open plains, not a tree for miles, and a man sitting on a horse. He is the highest point in that entire vast landscape. When a storm rolled in, and they came almost every summer afternoon, that man became a lightning rod. Records from the great cattle drives reveal a frightening truth. Lightning killed more cowboys than bullets, stampedes, and snakebites combined. And one job was worse than all the others. The trail cook faced the greatest risk because he was always next to a metal wagon and a cast-iron stove, right in the middle of an open field. The most experienced men knew the rule. At the first sound of thunder, get off the horse, let the animal go, and press your body against the ground. Anyone who did not respect the sky was taken by it. Fact 13. The Pony Express was a financial disaster that lasted only 19 months. The Pony Express became a legend in the movies, a brave young rider galloping across the prairie, a letter in his saddlebag, dodging danger to deliver the mail. The bravery part is true. The rest is far less glorious. The service began in April 1860 and shut down in October 1861. Do the math. It lasted only 19 months, and it lost a huge amount of money. It lost more than $200,000 at the time, about $6 million today. It was a financial disaster from beginning to end. What killed the business was technology. When the transcontinental telegraph lines were connected from coast to coast, a message that took a horse 10 days to deliver could cross the country in seconds. Overnight, the Pony Express became obsolete. The three owners, William Russell, Alexander Majors, and William Wardell, all went bankrupt. The riders went down in history. The business itself was actually one of the biggest failures of the West. Fact 14. Thousands of mail-order brides fell for nothing but lies. The story of mail-order brides is sold as romance. The reality was much uglier. Starting in the 1860s, Western newspapers ran Lonely Hearts columns, where frontier men placed ads looking for wives. On the other side of the country, in eastern cities, thousands of women read those ads and dreamed of a new life. They wrote back, exchanged letters, and fell in love with the idea. Then they sold everything they owned, boarded a train, and crossed the entire country. Weeks of hard travel. The shock came when they arrived. Many of those men had lied about everything: the land that did not exist, the money they did not have, the past they were hiding. Some were already married, and there was nothing the women could do. No law to protect them, no money to return, no way to go back home. Trapped on the other side of the country beside a stranger who had already lied before they even stepped off the train. Fact 15. The owner of the land. Where gold was found, died penniless. Think about this. The man who owned the land where the gold rush began ended his life broke in a hotel room. His name was John Augustus Sutter. In the 1840s, he controlled a huge piece of California's Sacramento Valley. On January 24, 1848, one of his employees, James Marshall, found gold in the river that ran past Sutter's sawmill. That discovery was what spread gold fever around the world. But the same fortune that made thousands of people rich destroyed Sutter. Prospectors invaded his land. They killed his cattle, tore down his buildings, and took over every corner of the property. He went to court, but it did no good. No one wanted to protect one man against a crowd. For the next 32 years, he knocked on Congress's door asking for compensation that never came. On June 18, 1880, he died bankrupt in a Washington hotel. He started the greatest gold rush in history and ended up with nothing. Fact 16. Between 30% and 40% of men in the West lived under fake names. Think about this. In many frontier towns, 1 out of every 3 men gave the census taker a name that did not match any official document. Army deserters, fugitives from justice, men running from debts, and even from their wives crossed the Mississippi and simply became someone else. On cabin doors, many carved 3 letters into the wood: GTT, gone to Texas. It was the message left by someone disappearing without looking back. The frontier offered a real second life. The price was staying silent for the rest of your life. And it was not just outlaws. Gamblers, saloon owners, and even men wearing a sheriff's badge went by nicknames, and no one asked for their birth name. Billy the Kid was born Henry McCarty. Butch Cassidy's real name was Robert Leroy Parker. Many died and took their real names, their families, and their entire past to the grave. What if the man sitting next to you in the saloon was wanted in 3 states? Fact 17. An outlaw's career lasted an average of 4 years. Forget what the movies sold you. The typical Old West outlaw did not die with a gun in his hand during a high-noon showdown. The records tell a different story. A life of crime lasted about 4 years. The average age at death or arrest was barely over 24, and the end was almost never glorious. Most died hiding in the wilderness, from cold, hunger, or disease. No bed, no food, no medicine. Hunted like animals, they died alone without a penny in their pockets. Then there was Jesse James. Born in Missouri in 1847, he robbed banks and trains for nearly 16 years. He died in 1882 at the age of 34, shot in the back by Robert Ford, a member of his own gang who was after the reward money. James lasted so long that he became a legend, but he was the exception. The rule was short, cold, and not romantic at all. Fact 18. Opium dens operated in broad daylight. Before 1875, opium dens in San Francisco operated openly on commercial streets. Lawyers, merchants, and politicians came and went without hiding. One account from the 1890s said there were at least 300 of these places in Chinatown alone. Then came the turning point. On November 15, 1875, the Board of Supervisors passed the first anti-drug law in American history. And it was not about health. The law targeted the Chinese way of smoking opium, with fines ranging from $50 to $500. Notice the detail. Laudanum, the opium tincture sold in pharmacies to white customers, remained legal. The police turned a blind eye to places that served only Chinese customers and cracked down on those that allowed white people inside. The police chief himself admitted that the goal was to stop white people from smoking. The country's first drug law was born as racism disguised as public health policy, and it became the model for everything that came afterward. Fact 19. Bounties for scalps were created by Europeans, not native people. Most books tell this story wrong. The first person to put a price on a native person's head in America was not an Indian. It was a Dutchman. In 1641, Governor Willem Kieft in Manhattan offered payment for every scalp from the Raritan people that was brought to him. From then on, it became government business. During King Philip's War in 1675, Massachusetts and Connecticut paid their Narragansett allies 5 shillings per scalp. During King William's War, the amount rose to 8 pounds for each man killed. In 1755, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Phipps signed a decree offering payment for scalps, including those of women and children. Between 1675 and 1760, there were more than 60 such decrees in New England alone. Many tribes only began scalping on a large scale after colonists turned human heads into money. Hollywood placed all the blame on the Indians, but someone else printed the posters and paid the bill. Fact 20. Wells, Fargo, spent more hunting down robbers than it lost to them. Everyone knows the legend, the lone outlaw stopping a stagecoach in the middle of the desert, gun in hand. But the numbers tell a different story. On January 1, 1885, the company's own detectives, James Hume and John Thacker, published a report called The Robber's Record. It listed 313 stagecoach robberies between 1870 and 1884. Nearly 350 crimes when the attempted robberies were included. Now pay attention. Over those 14 years, Wells Fargo lost $415,000 in robberies, but it spent $512,000 on detectives, rewards, and protection. In other words, hunting down the outlaws cost more than the outlaws stole. And there was more. Over half of the robberies were never solved. Many thieves disappeared without a trace and were never caught. So the question remains, in this whole story, who was really coming out ahead? Fact 21. The women who owned the West, and no one told you about them. You grew up watching the same movie, the tough cowboy and the helpless young woman waiting to be rescued, but the records tell a different story. The Homestead Act of 1862 gave 160 acres of land to any head of household over the age of 21, and that included women, single women, widows, and abandoned wives. Many crossed the country alone to become landowners. The numbers? Historians estimate that women filed between 10% and 18% of all land claims in the West, in some states more than 20%, and they secured ownership at a higher rate than men. Eleanor Pruitt Stewart was a housekeeper. She went to Wyoming in 1909, cleaned a rancher's house, and claimed her own piece of land next door. She died as a landowner. Hollywood erased these women. They did not fit the story the studios wanted to sell. And the next case is even harder to believe. Fact 22. Almost the entire Old West fit into just 5 years. Hollywood stretched the Old West across an entire continent and decades of movies. The truth is much shorter. Almost every legend you know was packed into a 5-year window. In 1876, gold was discovered in Deadwood, in the Dakota Territory. 2 years later, in 1878, the Lincoln County War broke out in New Mexico. On July 14, 1881, Pat Garrett killed Billy the Kid with a shot in the dark. 3 months later, on October 26, 1881, the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday faced the cowboys near the OK Corral in Tombstone. It lasted less than a minute. During those same years, Dodge City was at the height of the cattle drives. Stop and think about that. Deadwood, Lincoln, Tombstone. Only a handful of winters separated each of those names. What came afterward did not become a movie. The barbed wire fence came, the railroad tracks came, and someone had to erase that world. Fact 23. 50 million people saw him before movies even existed. Before any camera ever filmed a single Western, one man was already filling arenas around the world. William Cody, Buffalo Bill, took his Wild West show on the road for 30 years, from 1883 to 1913. The final count came close to 50 million spectators from the United States to Europe. The peak came in 1893, the same year as the Chicago World's Fair. Cody set up his arena right next to the fairgrounds. There were 318 performances in a single season, an average of 16,000 people per show, and more than 5 million in total. He left the city with $1 million in cash and never paid the fair a single cent. In the arena, there were galloping horses, live bison, a stagecoach attack, and Lakota warriors reenacting the West. Cody did not just live in that world. He turned it into a spectacle and sold that image before Hollywood was even born. Everything that came afterward copied every detail. Fact 24. Cowboy boots were a symbol of debt, not freedom. Pay attention to this. In 1875, a custom-made pair of boots cost between $15 and $20. That sounds cheap today, but a trail cowboy earned $25 a month. Do the math. 2, sometimes 3 months, just to pay for the leather on his feet. And almost no one paid cash. The usual way was to buy them on credit at the company store. The young man put up his wages as collateral and spent the entire season paying off the boots. He worked all summer owing money on what he was already wearing. So think again about that image. The cowboy riding freely across the plains, his boots shining in the sun. The symbol of the open frontier. The truth is harsher. Most of the time, those boots were bought before the first day of work and were not fully paid off until the last. He rode free, but in boots that did not even belong to him yet. Fact 25. The last stagecoach. Robbery did not happen in 1890. It happened on December 5, 1916. A snowstorm covered Jarbidge Canyon, Nevada, a gold mining town in the middle of nowhere. Fred Searcy was driving the United States mail wagon, pulled by 2 horses between Rogerson, Idaho, and Jarbidge. He had been on the job for only 2 weeks. At around 6:30 in the evening, a man came out of the brush, climbed onto the back of the wagon, and shot Searcy in the head at point-blank range. He died instantly. The robber took nearly $4,000, about $90,000 today. His name was Ben Cool, a horse thief and career criminal. He was convicted using the first palm print ever admitted as evidence in an American courtroom. He was sentenced to death, which was later changed to life in prison. The money was never found, and the Old West that the history books said had died was still standing, 26 years later.